Welcome into Sports Around the Bar, where today we are previewing for the 2020 season both the AFC and NFC East. These two divisions are going to be very, very interesting, I think, this year. It's going to be very hard to call. These are two of the divisions I struggled with the most when we were talking about where everybody finishes. Let's get right into it. Starting with the AFC side, let's talk about the Buffalo Bills, who I have winning this division at 10-6. I know this is a darling for a lot of people out there. People like this defense. They like what they've seen out of the running game. They like the addition of Stephon Diggs, and I like all those things as well. I think the real question for Buffalo is actually twofold this year. I think, first off, they're going to play a tougher schedule than they did last year. I think pretty much everybody out of the AFC East, I would say, had a pretty easy ride comparatively to the rest of the NFL. We talk about their opponents in last year's schedule. This year, I think things get a little bit more difficult, so I think the record takes a slight step back because of that. And I also think, on top of it, we're going to see if Josh Allen, if teams are able to take away his running ability and force this guy to throw. Because while I like the addition of Stephon Diggs, and they still have John Brown for speed, and they have Cole Beasley underneath, they now have their weapons for this young man to throw to. My question is going to be, can he take a step forward in the passing game, or are we going to see some more struggles in that regard that might lead to some losses against tougher opponents? Still like the Bills. I think they can beat most teams on any given Sunday. But this is still a squad that I think is very, very reliant on being able to set the tempo and being able to get out in front and being able to run the ball. I think this team is going to have a lot of difficulty if they fall behind catching up with the way Josh Allen has sort of, I don't want to say made himself a problem, because he can throw the ball. He has a lot of nice plays. He's just not consistent enough in throwing yet for me to believe in his ability to do it from behind game in and game out. So this team's still built very much like it was last year. I see 10-6 being a very solid finish for them. The question to me is, can we see some development with Josh Allen and his accuracy, or is what you see kind of what you get with him as a prospect at this point? After that, we have the Patriots, and I have them going 8-8, and this is the big head scratcher because they could win 4 games or they could win 12. I mean, the real story here is going to be what happens with Bill Belichick, and what do we kind of perceive now that he's sort of had his divorce from Tom Brady and Tom's gone off to Tampa. I think it's very likely Tampa has some success. I think the harder road here is for the Patriots to have success, even in a division like the AFC East. I still have them going 8-8. I think this defense will still be stout, regardless of who plays and who doesn't. I think Bill Belichick always seems to have a scheme to make the best out of the players he has available. When it comes down to it, I think this team will be a defensive, running-style team that relies a lot on playing some dirty football, winning in the trenches, and winning closer games than they're used to with a guy like Tom Brady that doesn't make a lot of mistakes. I like Cam Newton coming in. He gives him options, especially if he's healthy enough to run the ball himself. He gives him options in that regard. But with these receivers, I just don't see Julian Edelman going wild with Cam Newton throwing him the ball. I've been wrong before. It's the Patriots after all. Who knows? Maybe they don't skip a beat and they're still a 12-win team and still the class of the AFC. I just think they take a step back this year. And when I say take a step back, I mean it's a pretty significant one when we're talking about the difference between Cam Newton, who outside of his MVP year, let's just say he's not Tom Brady. I think he's still a quality starter in the league. I think he's a guy that they're still fortunate to have got for as cheap as they got, as late as they got him in free agency. I just can't predict them to beat a team like the Bills or beat teams like the Ravens and beat teams like the Chiefs out when it comes to record to go win that first round bye in this year's playoffs. So I have the Patriots finishing 8-8, still a respectable season. I think they'll be kind of one of those fringe playoff teams. I see them probably getting it in, maybe as the 7th seed, but it's going to be a tough kind of line to play, especially now without Mohamed Sanu on the team. I think the Patriots are going to have some questions at that wide receiver position. Moving on to the Jets, I have them finishing 6-10, as you can see on the slide. This is an interesting team too, because again, I've been a long-term kind of supporter for Sam Darnold as a quarterback. I've forever said I don't feel like he has enough weapons to succeed, but now with Jamison Crowder there, they just drafted Denzel Mims. We're going to see if that's starting to change a little bit. I like their kind of wholesale approach to fixing the offensive line, where they've just tried to throw a bunch of offensive linemen at the problem and see if someone can, basically they're hoping to put the best group of guys together on that offensive line. When I look at it, though, I just don't see this offense jumping off the page. And I look at some of the inadequacies on defense. I just see this team as still a developmental squad that needs to add more players before they're ready to win in today's NFL. I like them in this division. I think they can give the Bills and the Patriots, with the way those two teams are set up, I think they can give them trouble. I think once you step outside of the division, though, they're going to have trouble matching up with some of these other teams out there. And while I like Sam Darnold, the questions are going to come in this year if they don't have at least I think an 8-8 season. People are going to be talking about, is it time to replace him? Even though I think that's totally unfounded. I think we still need to see him with another weapon or two, or another year even with Denzel Mims before we're ready to say we've seen enough out of Sam Darnold to know he can't be a good quarterback. Le'Veon Bell's going to be another interesting player this year. Obviously, his first year with the Jets didn't go to plan with the amount of production he got for the number of touches. But we're talking about Le'Veon Bell. I think if this offensive line plays a little bit better and Denzel Mims is the deep threat we all kind of expect him to be coming in, we might see a little bit better of a running game out of the Jets and maybe a little bit more effectiveness out of Le'Veon Bell himself. If they can get that going and they can throw to Le'Veon Bell, this might be a team that upsets, that can be an upset alert every week, every time they play one of these better teams, especially if they're overlooked. But for now, I can't give them more than 6 wins. I think this team still has some inadequacies and still has some question marks. They're going to be, I don't even want to call them a fringe team. I see them as maybe the 10th or 11th best team in the AFC. They're getting better, but I don't think the Jets are there yet. Speaking of that, let's talk about the Dolphins at 4-12, because this team tried to just gobble up a defense under head coach Brian Flores this offseason. They've brought in a ton of signings, and on paper, I love it. I love all these guys coming in. They've needed help on the defensive side of the ball for years. But every time I watch a team try to buy a bunch of players out of free agency and say, we're just going to be good now, it never works out, and I think that's going to happen a little bit here with the Dolphins. They did name Ryan Fitzpatrick the starter. I wonder how long that's going to last. I don't see it lasting more than 4 or 5 games. I think when you spend that high of a pick on a quarterback, we're going to see Tua sooner rather than later. It's just going to happen. And when it happens, the real question is going to be, how ready is he to take on an NFL workload with NFL windows sort of tightening up compared to what he's used to in college, especially at Alabama with that track team they had at wide receiver. What are we going to get out of Tua from day one as a starter? And I think that is probably going to be the big question for the Dolphins this year. They've had giant steps forward with guys like Devontae Parker while he's playing with Ryan Fitzpatrick. Does that continue? Is he the same guy under a new quarterback, or do we see him start to regress again to some of his earlier years where he wasn't quite as effective? Their offensive line needs a lot of help too. I don't really believe in any of their running backs. They have some questions there. My biggest point with the Dolphins is, can you take this sort of mercenary group of free agents coming in the defensive side of the ball and turn it into a cohesive unit right away, especially in a year where COVID has kind of interrupted a lot of your offseason processes? I don't have any faith in it. I think the Dolphins finished 4-12, probably a better 4-12 than we saw last year out of this, probably a better sort of performance out of this team than we saw last year, but I still see them as being one of the teams that needs to improve the most still in the AFC. Moving on to the NFC East, as you can see right here, I have the Dallas Cowboys winning the division at 11-5. While I just said I don't think the Dolphins can go and buy a team in the offseason, I like some of these moves that the Cowboys have made to sort of buff up this team in the offseason. Now, I know we're kind of expecting an Earl Thomas signing a couple weeks from now, especially with them cutting someone like Clinton Dix this late into the process. I expect that too, and when they add him, I'll say this team is probably better for having him. On top of that, we're talking about a high-powered offense that hopefully will be more consistent against the better teams this year. You've got Dak Prescott playing for a contract, so I expect he'll have another good year as well. You've got CeeDee Lamb. You've got Amari Cooper now returning on a massive contract. You've got Michael Gallup, who's out there to prove himself as well. This team is stacked on the offensive side of the ball. They still have a good offensive line. They still have Zeke Elliott playing running back. This team should have no problems on offense, and I think they've taken a bunch of risks on defense to try to improve and get better. I have no problem with that. I think that's exactly what a team in this position needs to do. They just need to be more consistent against some of the top-end talent in the NFL. I think their big struggles were against some of the better teams, and especially what comes to mind is the Patriot game from last year. When they were playing good teams, they weren't quite the same. The question is going to be, in 2020, can they get a little more consistent against those better teams? I think the answer to that is yes. I think they're going to be a little bit better than they were last year, and I think they're going to this time win the division instead of losing it out to the Eagles, who I have also finishing at 9-7. Going on to the Eagles here really quickly, this team is going to be hard to bet on. When you talk about their secondary and the struggles they've already had, I think when you talk about them bringing in Darius Slay, while I do like the move, there's still a lot of kind of gray area as to whether that will be a good move long term. I like the fact that they brought him in and they got aggressive at the position. I will say this, though. Jim Schwartz's defense has never relied on the secondary being elite. It's always been about the front four penetrating and getting pressure without having to blitz. And the question is going to be, can the Eagles still do that? Yeah, I think they're going to be just as effective. I mean, guys like Fletcher Cox, even though he's been there for a long time, I think he's still going to be an absolutely effective defensive tackle, even coming in rushing the passer. They've got just a number of names on that defensive line who will be able to make an impact. And as long as Jim Schwartz has that, the defense will be, at the very least, tolerable and doing their part. The real question is going to be the offensive side of the ball. Did they do enough at receiver, drafting a guy like Jalen Reagor to sort of turn around those woes? Because due to both injury and sort of just players not being ready with guys like J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, they have had struggles at the wide receiver position here lately. Are they going to continue those struggles into 2020? I'd say the answer to that is probably yes. They've already had some injuries come in with guys like Andre Dillard missing the rest of the year as well. While I like the Eagles, they're just hard to bet on. I think this is a good team. I don't think this is a great team. And I think short of them just owning this division and really winning a bunch of their divisional games, this is going to be a tough run to the playoffs for them. I do see them making it, but I see them making it in behind a team like Dallas, who, when I look at them on paper, I think Dallas probably has the edge comparatively. Moving on to the Giants. This is a team that, again, you saw I had them at 5-11 this year. I think this is going to be another sort of building year for a guy like Daniel Jones, who admittedly has been pretty good in his rookie season. I was one of the guys that was saying it was too high of a pick at 6 for him to come in, but he's definitely proved me wrong in that aspect. The offensive side of the ball looks all right. I think their interior is interesting. They have a guy like Nick Gates coming in at center. I think that'll be interesting. Kevin Zeitler's a great right guard. Hernandez hopefully has a better year than last year and can get back to his rookie sort of form where he was very, very effective on the interior. The real question is the tackles, especially with Nate Solder sitting out, who wasn't great in the first place, and then a rookie with Andrew Thomas coming in. Are they going to be able to keep pressure and keep these defensive ends at the NFL level off of Daniel Jones long enough for him to make plays? It's going to be the most interesting question with this offense, because I think Saquon will be a good running back. You're going to see 1,000+ yards out of him, no problem. And then you've got receivers now in guys like Darius Slayton, who seems to come out of the woodwork. They still have Golden Tate on the roster. They still have Sterling Shepard. They have Evan Ingram at tight end. They have weapons now for this young quarterback. The question is going to be more protection than it is going to be, does he have people to throw to? I'm okay with their weapons. I actually like their weapons a lot, especially with guys like Slayton kind of coming on and finding a rhythm with Daniel Jones. The real question is going to be, can this offensive line block well enough for the offense to succeed? I think they've got some issues there. We'll see what happens. As far as the defensive side of the ball, they have maybe two of the two worst starting corners in football. I like them trying to bring in a guy like Logan Ryan, but again, he struggled last year a little bit in Tennessee. While I do believe he has some value, especially in the slot against some shiftier wide receivers, he's going to struggle against speed. And I think they're going to put him in a lot of positions where he's going to get burned next year. This year, I should say, in 2020. We're going to be talking about how he's not a good player anymore because they put him in matchups he's not supposed to be in. And we're going to be talking about the Giants being one of the worst defenses in football because they're not able to stop the pass. Outside of their defensive line, which is decent, it's not a bad group of guys, they do have... Outside of their defensive line, I think they have a lot of weaknesses on this team. Their safeties aren't the worst in the world, but especially in the cornerback room, they are going to be easy targets when it comes to other teams coming in and throwing the ball against them. And I think that plays against what you want the Giants to do. You want the Giants to be able to run the ball first with Saquon Barkley and then hit you for some home runs with Daniel Jones throwing to some of these dynamic wide receivers. I think they're going to be playing a lot of catch-up. And if you can take a guy like Saquon Barkley basically out of the game where you relegate him to only catching dump-off passes, then I think a lot of teams are going to have success against the Giants, which is why I have them at 5-11. Rounding things out, I want to talk about the Washington Redskins, and I'm going to call them the Redskins until they pick a new team name. When we're talking about Washington, I think their biggest issue is going to be, what are we going to get out of Dwayne Haskins? Is he still a starter? Because I was one of the guys beating the drum saying they don't need to draft Tua. They need to see what they have in Dwayne Haskins. They have a seemingly number one wide receiver in Terry McLaurin. Hopefully he's able to repeat what he did in 2019 this year as well. I think, again, this is still an offense that has a lot of problems. You're talking about all the departures at running back as well. They're going to have, I think, a hard time running the ball. I don't think they're necessarily going to be a great unit. Maybe they have one of these guys come out of the woodwork. Maybe it's Bryce Love's turn to step up and really show that it doesn't matter so much who's running the ball when your offensive line is doing well. Because I do still like their offensive line. But when we're talking about Dwayne Haskins, he doesn't have a ton of options to throw to outside of Terry McLaurin that I absolutely love. I just don't see this offense being absolutely dynamic. And when we're talking about their defense, Their defensive line looks great. I mean, bringing in a guy like Chase Young, I think is going to be fantastic. I can't wait. I hope he has a Nick Bosa type of year where he's just a transformative talent and can turn that defense around and basically single-handedly. They still have Ryan Kerrigan. They still have Montez Sweat, who I understand is probably going to be a little bit more of a rotational guy for those other two this year. They have options up front. What they don't have is a lot of options behind that. I think they have some issues in the cornerbacks position. I think Landon Collins and Apke are good safeties. But I think, again, kind of like the Giants, they are just supremely vulnerable at cornerback. And in today's NFL, teams will take advantage of that. I don't think they have a good linebacking core either. I think they've kind of left it to be a little piecework, patchwork, I should say, and it's still not quite up to snuff. I see the Redskins struggling again this year, and maybe in 2020's draft, or 2021's draft, I should say, we'll be talking about the Redskins moving on from Dwayne Haskins and drafting somebody else. I'm not as sold on him as I am some other quarterbacks, but I think it's too early, especially in years 1 and 2, to get rid of a quarterback just because he hasn't had a lot of success, especially on these bad teams that haven't put them in positions to have success. So when we're talking about Dwayne Haskins, he's on a hot seat. Hopefully this year's question is going to be, can he do enough to sort of put those rumors to bed and have everybody say, he's a good quarterback, we just need to get better on offense, and he'll be ready to go. So that's where I have it. Let me know your thoughts on where I have both of these divisions in the comments below. I appreciate you guys watching, and we'll see you next time where we're going to do the AFC and NFC South as well. Hey, thanks for watching. If you agree with what you saw, make sure you hit the like button down below in this video. It helps me out immensely when it comes to the YouTube algorithm. If you didn't agree with me, that's okay too. We're here to talk sports, and we're here to disagree on things. It's what makes it fun. Throw a comment down below. Let me know what you disagree with. Let me know your thoughts on the matter. And if you haven't yet, make sure you hit the subscribe button right here so we can talk sports every day.